we might not feel playful because life is so overwhelming to us. If we feel like I don't feel playful at all, that is even more reason we need to do it. Be silly. Like I said, use accents. Just tune into what they are doing and what they're feeling. That is everything.
You may already know Dr. Tina Payne Bryson from her 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. They're both co-authored by Dan Siegel, and they've been translated into over 50 languages. She and Siegel also wrote The Yes Brain and The Power of Showing Up. And Dr. Bryson is also the author of The Bottom Line for Baby. But her new book, co-authored with Jorzy Wyson-Vincent, is The Power of Play. And this may be my favorite of all of her books because it takes us back to the simplicity of parenting, of playing with our children, just showing up for them and being present. And in this episode, I cry, but we dive deep into how we can really bring the joy of childhood back to our kids and connect with them on their level. Let's dive in. Tina Bryson Payne, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited. I think this is your 3rd appearance. I'm probably just obsessed with you at this point. And you've written another book, The Way of Play. And I feel like this one might be the keys to my heart. So thank you so much for always taking the time and putting in the effort outside of just showing up in your practice on social media and your research and really giving us the tools to integrate this science into our parenting today. So thank you so much. And thank you for being here again.
Thank you for having me. It's a mutual obsession. I love you and your work. And I think, you're not really your main area of influence isn't necessarily parenting, but you do have a lot of influence on parenting and how you share your beautiful family and how you and your husband are really engaged. And I appreciate you because you help me be healthier, which allows me to be able to reach more people. So I'm so honored to be here. I just am excited about our conversation today.
Me too. And I'm so curious too, because you have so many accolades. You've written so many books. Like, why write another book and why write The Way of Play?
Yeah. I swore I wasn't going to write another book. And I say that after every book, but this time I really mean it. This probably is my last one. I had not planned on writing any books ever. That was never my life goal. But when I'm a nerd. I love the science. I love applying the science. In fact, my plan was to, really be a professor and teach research and all this stuff. And then when I started really getting into interpersonal neurobiology, I was like, I can't stay at a university setting. I have to go talk to parents and clinicians and educators. And I just was lit up by this stuff. And I'm such a curious person that the more I started learning, the more I needed to learn about the brain. And then when I started figuring out that I had little kids at home while I was studying this, and I was like, oh my gosh, this explains so much. And it turns everything that I've known, even as a trained educator. I was my first degree was to be a high school English teacher, really upside down to understand differently. So anyway, that's how these things have unfolded. So I wasn't planning on writing this book, but I have a center in Southern California called the Center for Connection, and it's a mental health and interdisciplinary practice that takes all these different experts to kind of really peel the layers back to figure out where dysregulation might be coming from, et cetera. And one of the therapists who's worked with me for a long time is a play therapist who certifies and trains other people to be play therapists. And she's just brilliant. So a couple of years ago, she said, hey, I want to do this parenting program with you. And we'll take all the stuff from your life's work and then we'll take all the play therapy stuff and let's just teach it to parents. And as I started reading what she had in mind, I was like, oh, I see all the science behind this. And we got to share this with more people than just a few people who might sign up for a class. So let's write a book. So The Way of Play was birthed with the idea of taking what play therapists know, taking from the neurodevelopmental brain building science that comes from, that's from my life's work, and giving it to parents in a way that solves a couple of problems. The first one being that even really well-educated, well-intentioned parents often don't know what to do. They're like, okay, well, so get on the floor and then what? So they don't know what to do. They find it, and by they, I mean myself too, often really freaking boring. And like, it's just mind numbing at times. So they don't enjoy it. And then it also feels like it has to go on forever. And so what this book is simple strategies for what to do in the moment for just a few minutes a day that build your relationship with your child, build your child's brain, and help them build all kinds of social and emotional, cognitive, motor skills at the same time. And so I'm just really excited about sharing it with people.
What I love about this book is that it makes you feel good as a parent. I think a lot of times we're on our heels and we're like, okay, they're having a tantrum. I am going to recognize your feelings and now I'm going to empathize with those feelings, but I'm also going to hold my boundaries. And it's like you feel like you're just managing your children. Like, and I don't even manage my employees that way. I'm like, go for it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Bring your ideas to the table. Yeah, you run with that. Like, it's not the same kind of freedom that I actually even give my employees as their boss and their manager. It's more like directive, and it doesn't feel good. Whereas play feels so good. It feels like you can see them light up. You can see that connection happen. But I got to take it back. Like a play therapist, what's a play therapist? Like, how did that job even come about? Like, what do they do?
So play therapist is an additional certification based on a bunch of training that's done for people who are licensed mental health professionals. So typically play therapists are pediatric and adolescent psychotherapists. And there are lots of different ways to do it. What Georgie, my co-author, trains people in and what she's trained in is child-led play therapy. And the reason we talk about play therapy is, well, I'll just tell a personal story. So I'm a brand new licensed therapist, seeing kids and adolescents. And this is still true today, even as it was true back when I was studying. Most of my training as a mental health professional, and this is still very much the case now, was what I would call top down. So it's like using the top parts of our brain. So it's insight based, language based, narrative based, having insight. But all the kids who were in my office were kids who had undeveloped prefrontal cortices, who didn't have those capacities yet, and even more so, like kids who struggled in those areas were in my office because maybe it wasn't developed as much as we would expect developmentally. So I remember going to Dan Siegel, who's my co-author on my first 4 books, and saying, like, I'm not prepared for this. What do I do with these kids as a therapist? Like, I'm not gonna put a 6-year-old on the couch and be like, well, let's challenge that thought, So I needed some other strategy. So I actually did some additional training using what's called sensory motor psychotherapy, like using the body and movement. And then I got some training in play therapy. But here's a good way to say it, Kelly. When kids don't say it, they often play it. And so play therapy can actually be used all the way up until like adolescence, early adolescence, but it's most effective in early childhood because play is the primary language of children. It's their first language. It really is. And so they don't yet have the vocabulary and the cognitive skills and all of that to really necessarily reflect and have insight and share and then make decisions in the same way that older brains do, even children and adolescents. But play allows kids to play out what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, the experiences they're having in the world, and allows them to try things on. So just like, I think about that scene in Friends where Ross and Chandler and Rachel are trying to get the couch up the stairs, and they're like, pivot, this scene. And I'm like, the building blocks for that skill start with in toddlerhood, with those little toys that have the shapes, and you're trying to get the shapes and the holes, and you're trying to manipulate objects in space. Like the way we learn how to do everything we do usually started with the way that we played. But also, if kids have things that are happening in their world that they're trying to experiment with, let's say you have a child who has a parent who's kind of more command and demand, hyper controlling, maybe even a hyper anxious parent who is like just locks everything down and is really like command and demand. In play, one of the things we might see from kids is taking on positions of control and power. Because they may feel kind of powerless in their world because they don't feel like they have as much of a voice. So one of the things they'd be working on is experimenting. What does that feel like to be in charge? And every child plays those themes as well. But really play therapy in the office allows kids to process what is happening, what has happened, what's going to happen. So if there's been trauma or anything like adverse that they're dealing with, they can process what has already happened. But they're also using that opportunity in play therapy to try on and practice different ways of feeling and different ways to solve problems that they haven't yet figured out in real life. So that's what we can do as parents. A lot of these things are very simple to do, is that allows kids to process what's happening, release stress, and build skills.
you can use play therapy to work through old stress and traumas. You can use play therapy to plan for what's to come. You can just get on the floor and play to find out what's happening. How do you suggest parents start using play to move through things or to kind of understand their kids?
Yeah. I think, it's in one of the illustrations we have in the book is like an underwater world that's just amazing. And to kind of encourage parents to dive into their child's play, because you will learn who your child is in a whole new way. What lights them up? What are they drawn toward? What are they not interested in? What kinds of themes are they playing out? Right. And we don't want to be too over prescriptive. Like if your child is, like I did not grow up around a lot of boys, and I had 3 boys, and like I got them baby dolls. Yeah, you're a 3-boy mom too. And they would like experiment with what it was like to try and collapse the baby's head in the door jamb, like how much pressure they needed to make the baby's head, crash in. And so we have to be careful not to read into that. Like, I don't want to be like, my child has a homicidal tendency. My child's a sociopath. Like, don't read too much into your child's play. But the first thing we want to do is to tune in and observe with curiosity. Okay, so that's the very first thing. And then the best thing is usually parents get too much in the way. So what we really want to do is follow their lead. That doesn't mean that you have to let them, step on your face. We can talk about how we can set parameters and limits even in play, but to just join in. And I think a lot of times we have forgotten how to play because our brains have developed. We have a different kind of thing. But the first thing is to try and let go, tune in, watch, and observe with curiosity, and then join in with some fun. And then, obviously some strategies to do this can be, obviously the book's full of strategies for how to do this.
I feel like Toshin will get down on the floor. He is number 2. He's in his own little world. He's like, do, cars and drugs, like talking to himself, talking to his trucks. Sebastian's at that age where he's 6, and you joked at the beginning of the podcast, like put him on the couch and ask him how he feels about that emotion. Like he doesn't want to talk about hard things. He'll actually ask us to stop talking about something if it makes him feel upset, if it makes him feel overwhelmed.
Great self-regulation strategy, by the way.
To ask us to stop talking.
Just notice that makes him feel uncomfortable and to say, I don't want to talk about that. Like he knows that stopping talking about it will make him feel safer in his body. That doesn't mean you have to follow that always, but that's a really strong skill. And it's also good boundary setting.
Yeah, well, great. I love it. He definitely is a kid who knows what he wants. He isn't the type, he wants to play with me. Like he's an oldest. He's like, let's go throw the ball, play with me, play Legos with me. What are you building? I'm building this. Like there's a lot of vocabulary there. There's a lot of talking. But whenever anything's hard, like I said, he doesn't really want to talk about it. And there were a couple of incidences that happened in the last year that have made him very anxious. So there's one incident, I'm going to tell you both of them, and then we'll talk about maybe how to move through trauma for our kids. So Sebastian, we have 2 car line pickups at his school. It's K through 4, and then, or pre-K to 4. So he was in Tyke. He was the first class, pre-K to 4, and then 5th through 8th, because it's a preschool through 8th grade class. And so the car line, all the cars come through, they all park, all the parents get out, they see all the kids on the curb, you grab your kid in the first car line, you put them in the car, you drive out, then the second line of cars come up. If you are a kid with an older sibling, you have to just scoot down the curb and wait for the 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to come out. Well, he's the oldest in our family, so we should be there at first car line pickup, right? And he's expecting us to be there at first car line pickup. And for every day of the school year, we were there at first line pickup, except for one. Chris got stuck in a little bit of traffic. He was in the parking lot when he saw the car line 1 leaving. He's got a big Thule on the top of his Yukon XL. Like he could have seen it if he looked in the parking lot, but he just got so overwhelmed and started hysterically crying. His teacher had to calm him down and like say, your mom and dad are coming, like slide him down to the curb. Some of his kids in his class, his friends, like there's a set of triplets who have a 4th grade and a 6th grade older sister. He was with friends, but it was terrifying for him. So that's story number 1. Number 2, we took our first trip internationally. And since before we had kids, we took our kids to France this summer, and we were in a hotel in Biarritz, which had this really amazing staircase that went up to the 3rd or 4th floor. And if you stood in the middle and you looked up, you could see the boys walking up the stairs. And they thought it was so fun that we would take the stroller and Julian in the elevator, and Sebastian got to run those stairs all the way to the top. Really old hotel, been there forever, the Palace. And of course, the elevator is not opening the doors when it gets to the fourth floor. It's coming back down. It's coming back down. And Chris would stay at the bottom. So the doors open and I'm like, oh, it's not opening at the fourth floor. We're going to have to figure this out. And he's like, well, I'll carry the stroller. And I'm like, did you call for Bash? Where's Bash? And he's like, oh. And he was like, Bash. And no sound of it, no sign of him. And he had basically got to the top of the elevator. We weren't there, which is like so many times when kids get lost, they like look for their parent, they freak out, and they sprint the other direction. So that's what he did. He waited for like a hot second at the top of the elevator. The doors didn't open, and he ran to our room, which was like down super long hallway, big L shape, you know? And I'm like, here's the baby. And I'm like sprinting up the stairs like as fast as I can. My poor husband, I'm always like, he's like, it's my fault. And I'm like, no, but yes, but no. But I'm like full sprint sweat. No, he's going to be hysterical. Peel down the hallway, and there he is, a guy with a walkie-talkie to the front desk, someone outside of their room who like heard him wailing in the hallway, where the parents were like, I'm so sorry, buddy. Come to the circle next time. Look down. You would have seen dad, you know? And it's just like now these two moments have really imprinted in his body and in his mind that we aren't going to be there, or what happens if mom and dad aren't there. And I've done all the things like, okay, so Mrs. Risborough, your teacher, she has our cell phone. I've texted with them. I've emailed with them. Look around, so-and-so's mommy and daddy. So they're on your baseball team. They're on your basketball team. No one would ever leave you here. Like if you feel unsure, you can call. It's just like, it's not hitting his emotional center. There is just, we are fight or flight, fear, freak out mode. And to the point where we're like, we want to be cuddled to fall asleep. We wake up in the middle of the night. We're in our room. Like the fears are full on. Whereas like Tashin's just like, morning, what day is it?
Remind me his age right now.
So Sebastian is 6 and Tashin just turned 4. They both October and November, 4 and 6.
But Sebastian's the one that's really having the freak out. The anxiety around this.
Yes. And I go all the way back to like, you were birthed and put in an ambulance and taken 20 miles away from me to CHLA. And like, you weren't even with your mom the moment, like I go to like some really deep, dark places. Like I have an SCD card of images from his birthday that I haven't even had the courage to open.
Okay. Well, someday I'm going to come sit with you and hold your hand. We're going to look at them together. The first thing I want to say is there are many factors at play here. Number one is developmentally. The reason I asked the age is because, okay, so we're going to kind of look at a mashup of development and temperament right here in this moment, because your 4-year-old who's like, good morning, I'm good, whatever. Part of that is development, part of that's temperament. But firstborns tend to be a little more high strung, a little bit more anxious. And even like he wants you to play with him a lot. We'll talk about that too. But developmentally, and then also we can talk about his history, right? So like early moments, that could be part of it. But here's the thing. Developmentally, something really interesting is happening between ages like 5 and 7. And what it is, let me say it this way. Development is never linear. And it's usually not synchronous either. Okay, so everybody knows what that means. Development's not linear. So you're going to have progressions and regressions, right? And we know that this is true around the brain, that the brain, as it has new skills that come on board, we might see regressions in other areas, right? So if you have a kid who's like starting to be able to pull themselves up and ambulate more, they might not babble as much, or might not have as many words at that time, as much vocalization at that time, et cetera. Or when they're starting to learn words, that we might see a little bit more motor clumsiness, right? So there's progressions and regressions. So development's not linear. What I mean when I say it's not synchronous is development's not just about one thing. So there's social and emotional, there's social development, there's emotional development, there's cognitive development, there's identity development, there's motor development, there's all these kinds of development that are all happening at once. The brain is the most complex known thing in the known universe. So there's a lot happening. And so what happens typically, and based on what you're telling me, he also sounds like a kid who's very bright. So what happens is at this age, he probably had a huge spurt of cognitive development, maybe even physical development. Oftentimes this stuff comes also around a time where they're starting to outgrow their clothes a little bit more. Like we see some of this happening at the same time. When kids at this age have a huge spurt of cognitive development, we have to remember that the emotional development is not synchronous with it. So the emotional development may not have come on board yet. So what this means is kids at this age have another burst of separation anxiety very typically, especially given certain temperaments. So what this means then is they can now cognitively imagine scarier things happening. So your 4-year-old's not like, well, what if I never see them again? Like not thinking about those things, right? But your 6-year-old is like, oh no, what does this mean? And he can think it all out. And so he has this cognitive ability to imagine scarier monsters and worse things happening. And like if kids are exposed to the news or national or like, scary weather things, hurricanes and earthquakes, all this stuff, they have the cognitive ability to imagine that and think about it, but they don't have the emotional ability yet to regulate those thoughts and emotions. So that's just where he is developmentally. All of that comes on board and gets synchronized, but it comes in spurts. So that's the first thing to just kind of keep in mind is with his temperament and his development. Now, what do you do? So all the stuff that you're doing is perfect. You should absolutely say like, here are the things you can do. You have lots of opportunities, you have lots of options, and you can do the problem solving kinds of things. And what if that doesn't work? What could you do next? You're an amazing problem solver. You can do all of that. And you should give them all of those assurances. I think 2 things I would add in, and you may have already done these, but one is to focus more on what actually happened from the moment it was really scary to what ended up happening. So you're really focusing on the end of the story more, not so much what happened leading up to that moment, to be like, and even when it was super, super scary, it was still okay. We all, that kind of thing. So you can focus on the kind of like happy ending. And if you remember, and I know the whole brain child well, this is sort of the name entertainment strategy, where we walk through what happened, how kids feel about it, but then also what is the happy ending? What did you know? What did you learn? You learned that we will always find you. You learned that that you're a great problem solver, and that even when it was scary, you handled it, right? So all the kind of pieces around that. The other thing I would say, all of that though is top down. All of that is language-based, narrative-based, logical-based. And what we know is that when kids have high emotions, not just kids, any adults, when we have high emotions, in the whole brain child, we talk about like flipping your lid, and we don't have access to those rational thoughts. So our emotions really take over, and it is fight, flight, freeze. We are in a state of threat. So what we really want to do is give cues of safety. And those are typically not as effective when they are logic word-based. They're much more effective when they are more what we would call bottom up, or as Dr. Mona Delahook talks about, body up. So this would mean being close to you at night as he's falling asleep. It would mean, maybe hugs. It would mean moving the body rhythmically somehow, either rocking or dancing to music. It might mean some compression. It might mean breathing in a different way. It might mean cozy comfort things like warm drinks and fuzzy blankets, like things that give us comfort. So those are really, really important, are as many cues of safety leading up to that as possible. He is absolutely old enough to learn some breathing strategies. I would recommend teaching him to put a hand on his chest and a hand on his belly, and noticing how that feels. And I would do that. I used to do this in therapy for kids who were struggling with some anxiety. And I would do it at night after the worry questions. And once their bodies were, you can tell when you're laying down next to your kid when their body's starting to relax and they feel more peaceful. And have them put a hand on their chest and a hand on their belly. And you can even put your hand on top of the hand on their chest, or put a stuffed animal there to provide just a little more pressure. And as they're falling asleep and you're there, it's cozy, it's safe. Then what happens is, after a daily practice of doing that 3 to 4 weeks, you can actually ask them. And I used to do this in therapy. I'd be like, hey, show me where you put your hands when you're falling asleep at night. And then as soon as they would do it, they would start yawning. And then I knew the brain had made a functional connection between the hands on the chest and the belly, and this state of relaxation and peace. And then I could say, did you notice what just happened? Like these two tools, your hands that you walk around with all the time, they are your peacemakers, or they help settle your body or calm your body. And anytime you're feeling anxious, you can do that. But what's really important is that gets solidly wired before it's used in a moment of anxiety. I made this mistake as a therapist. I taught it to a kid and I had him use it too early. And so then it wasn't effective, but it also came associated with the states of anxiety. So I know I've just been talking a long time, but let me say a couple more things about what I would think about from the strategies from the book. Number one is, you don't also have to go so direct to those things. So the way I would think about play with him is, first of all, your attunement, you tune in, you're checking, you're paying attention to him, you're giving him, like you're filling his cup of like, you have my full presence. Again, just for a few minutes. But you can really bring emotions to life. This is one of the strategies in the book, bring emotions to life in play settings that are not directly connected. My eldest loved, especially at the same age, to tie knots. He loved ropes and tying knots. It was like, he loved it so much. So he would tie a rope to a doorknob and then tie a knot to the top of a castle or a pirate ship or something like that, right? He would hand me the super guys, the little action figures. Now I can easily, he'd be like, come on, Mom, get this guy down to the ship. So I can easily take the guy and hook him on the rope and be like, and put him down in the ship. That's fine. That's great. I'm following his lead. We're having fun together. This is great. I'm just following his lead. But here I have an opportunity to bring emotions to life. And what I can do is introduce the emotions of the character into that moment. It's very simple. So I say, but I'm so scared. I don't know if I can do it. I've never done it before. Right? So I'm introducing an emotion. I'm bringing emotions to life through this little Batman guy. And by the way, this is so much more fun if you do that, because otherwise you're like it can be so boring, right? So I'm like, I'm so scared. I don't know if I can do it. And then you know what happens? And then I wait. And my 6-year-old will say like, I've got you. I'm going to come help you. Or you can do it. You're super brave. Or I can even say like, I don't know if I can be brave. It's so scary. And then I hear my kid introducing and encouraging me strategies to be brave, strategies to manage the emotion. And so all of those skills are being built in that moment and over time, so that now your kid is internalizing. And this is so simple to do. And you can do it in 3 minutes, same thing with, because play is fun, they're willing to sit through like things that frustrate them. They'll keep working at it until they don't want to anymore. But what it's doing is it's stretching their capacity in those moments. So that strategy of bringing emotions to life, you can introduce being brave. You can introduce feeling afraid. You can say like, but I'm all by myself. Where are my friends? And I can't even find my parents. You can even throw that in there at some point. But it's the pirate and it's Batman, even though Batman doesn't go on pirate ships, doesn't matter. So do you see what I'm saying? You can really build those skills as development is unfolding. And I think now is even the most important time, because when he's telling you, as we've talked about this before, behavior is communication. And his behavior around feeling uncomfortable around things where he might feel alone or afraid something bad might happen, this means his brain is on the verge of developing these skills. So now's the perfect time, and his brain's still so plastic. One other thing I'll say about that is that the way I handled that kind of new separation anxiety that happens developmentally at that time, besides through the play, is remembering that the brain is an association machine. So what feels good, they want more of. What feels bad, they want less of. And if it's fun enough, they'll stretch. And that's another one of the strategies in the book called stretch and scaffold. It's like, this comes from a developmental guy named Lev Vygotsky that talked about the zone of proximal development, which is a fancy way of saying like, you don't want to make things too easy for them because they won't stretch and grow. But if you make things too hard, they can't access it. So it's kind of like stretching and scaffolding those skills. So stretching and scaffolding, here's how I did this. So my 6-year-old, I had this with 2 of my 3 boys. 2 of my 3 boys hit this exact thing you're talking about. And they wouldn't want to go to the bathroom by themselves. They wouldn't want to go to their rooms by themselves. They wouldn't want to go upstairs by themselves. So I would say like, okay, you go to the bathroom. I'm going to be right around the corner. You're not going to be able to see me, but I'm going to sing a song so that you'll know I'm really close. And then I would add playfulness because, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. When I would I would make up a song, and it usually had body parts or something about farts or something silly or whatever. Yeah. So then they're laughing and it's funny and it's fun enough that they'll go into the bathroom Now, listen, they don't aim as well when they're afraid. And so, but you know what? They never aim well anyway. It's always going to be gross in the bathroom for 3 boys. So what would happen is he's given an opportunity to be a little bit uncomfortable, but feeling safe enough that he's doing it by himself. And same thing with going up the stairs. So I would sing, or I would start telling a story, and I would be like, I'm going to keep telling the story. So that can be really, really helpful. The reason we want to use playfulness, even if we're not on the floor playing, right? We're driving the car. We can't play like that. They're in the bathroom and we're trying to make dinner, whatever it is. Anytime we can introduce playfulness, it is a cue of safety. So there's a lot of science behind this. But basically, threat states and play states are incompatible states neurophysiologically. So if I'm in a threat state, there's no effing way I'm playing, right? And we know this. There was this incredible researcher, Jaak Panksepp, who was known as the rat tickler, which is kind of a funny thing to be known for. But he learned that rats actually play. He could track how much they played, and they actually made laughter noises, and he would track all of that. And one of the things he found is that when they would introduce a threat like cat hair into their cage, the play would completely stop and it would never really fully return. So obviously humans are much more nuanced and sophisticated than rats. So we do see play return after threat in human beings. But what that tells us, and this is really gross and it's kind of sad, but if you remove the cortex of a rat, they will continue to play. So that lets us know that play is very primitive. It's very low in our brains and bodies. It's a necessity, and it is part of our survival instinct and our survival needs. So anytime we can introduce playfulness, it is actually a cue of safety that becomes armor against threat states.
I mean, it makes me think so many things. I think back to my childhood, and we talked about my dad. He's like the biggest goofball teddy bear, always, always encouraging us and playing with us and joking with us. And like, he was that guy who'd be like, oh, you can't do it. He didn't know any of this science. My parents didn't know any. And my mom used to play, I think she used to play Barbie. I like have memories of her playing Barbies with me for like hours of Barbie play, and it's like, it's so sweet and it's so simple and it's like a different time, and they're not connected to smartphones, I always think about my mom wrapped up in the kitchen phone cord, like if someone called, it was like, shh, she was all wrapped up trying to hide around a corner and it was an open kitchen, it like didn't work. But it was just so sweet. And I like want that for my kids. Like I want them to look back and think that like mom and dad played with me and mom and dad were present with me. And, break my heart. The other day, Bash was in the bath and he was like, I don't remember you playing with me, Mom. You never play with me. And I was like gutted. I'd done the preview. Like I had done our questionnaire, like our pre-interview question with you. And I was just like, oh, shoot. For working parents, for people who are, I'm in my office today. I won't be home until 4. Chris will have picked them up from school. Like I really pride myself on being 100% there Monday, Wednesday, Friday for pickup and drop off. It's like, I have to have full work days. Like I have to be in the office to like pay our mortgage. Like what do my kids really need when it comes to play? Like how much time, what does that look like? Like how can I make it happen so they feel like their memories are me playing, not always being like, mommy has to make dinner, mommy has to change the baby's diaper, mommy has to get this nail. Like I feel like all the to-do list never ends as a parent. And sometimes I'll like roll into home and I don't want to be on my phone, but then I'm getting pings that it's like the Black Friday sale, but we can't figure out how to put pumpkin spice off wait list and back in stock. And I'm just like, why am I the only person who knows how to do this? It's like, I feel horrible. Like I have so much mom guilt. And I feel like a lot of parents have mom guilt or dad guilt for the amount of time that they're, I don't know, like distracted and or not fully present.
It's such a universal feeling and experience, everything you just talked about. And I honestly, there's no good parent who doesn't feel some of that. I think the more you feel it, the more you care, and you're trying to really be intentional. And there are the realities of the practicalities of making life work and making our families run, and the predictability that you provide by providing meals. They know that you're going to come home and you're going to make dinner and you're going to pick them up from school on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like all, and you're making sure the house is healthy, safe place for them, and that they have fun things to do, and you guys go on trips. Like all these things you do also count, even the boring things that you do, because the brain loves predictability. It's another cue of safety. So just you're also demonstrating the responsibility of running a family and all of that. So I think those are just realities. And kids want to play with us a ton. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote this book too is because there's a lot of books out there about free unstructured play and how kids need much more of it. And I agree with all of that. This is not a counter argument to that, but it's also that there was only one book I knew of that I loved, Lawrence Cohen's book called Playful Parenting, that really talked about how to play with our kids and what that is like. And I think it's so important to remember our kids want to play with us. It's a great alternative to screen time, which kids get way too much of. But you can't do it for hours and hours and hours and hours. You just can't. And kids will always want more. It'll never feel enough to them. So when they're like, you never play with me, what that means to me, it's just like a 5-year-old will be like, I hate you so much. They don't really mean that. That's a big emotion they're having in the moment. So when our kids say those things that gut us, it's also a reminder that he's really wishing we were playing more right now, like, or today. So keep that in mind. The other thing I would say is on days when you're away or, from them, any kind of separation. So separation would be they go to school, you're at work, you're out with your friends, you go to the grocery store, you bedtime, sleeping. These are all separations that when kids need most connection is before and after separations. So when you get home at 4:00 today, go pee, wash your hands, like do all the things that are just the basics. And if you can, 15 minutes to just get on the floor or join whatever they're doing. What emotional connection truly is, if you peel back the layers of what is emotional connection, is about joint attention. So if your kid is looking at a stick and they think it's a super cool stick, and you go and you're like, this is a cool stick, or what do you like about this stick? And you just join in and you share attention. That is true emotional connection. And so it also doesn't have to be like, well, now it's time to play. Everyone get out the playthings. Like, it doesn't have to be set up that way. It's really about joining our children, following their lead, joining with what their attention is. And most of the time they want to be playing and playing with us. I would say 15 minutes is a beautiful thing to do daily. If you can do it twice, great. If you have 45 minutes or an hour where you can really focus in and play and whatever, that's great. But it is not necessary to play for hours every day. It's just not necessary. And I'll say that if I played for hours every day with my kids, I would probably be so bored that I wouldn't be enjoying it. And children know when we're not enjoying it. And one of the most important things, so my boys are now 24, 21, and 18. My baby is a senior in high school. And I will say, like, they still like to be with my husband and me. Even our 24-year-old who's moved out, he comes home for dinner once a week. And we sometimes also see him on the weekends. And he's got a really busy, full life. They'd rather be with their friends than us. And that's appropriate. But I will say that they enjoy being with us. And the reason that came about is because they could tell we enjoyed being with them, at least most of the time or some of the time. And it's pleasant and enjoyable to be with us. So what I will say is, if you are like playing and you're annoyed and you're rolling your eyes and you hate being there, it's probably not a good thing to do. Find another way to play. Find another way. Turn on music and dance, or be like, let's go outside and I'm going to teach you what a succulent is, and we're going to go find succulents. We're going to go on a succulent hunt. Like, if that's more fun for you because you love gardening and plants, that is far better than sitting and doing something you think you're supposed to do. When people talk about attachment science, we're always talking about being like the safe haven for our child and really being for them when they have a need. And that's a huge important part, is that when there's distress, that we show up for them and help them feel safe and seen and soothed and secure, knowing we're going to show up for them. But the other just as important part of attachment is mutual delight. And so that's what play should be. And it's really a time to just really join them. So what I would say, Kelly, is when you're driving home on those days, if you're like sitting there and you're really focusing your attention on like, oh, I feel so bad, I wasn't there this afternoon or whatever, that changes your mindset and how you're feeling. Instead, what if on the way home you were like imagining like what could be fun that we could do for 15 minutes, or I'm really looking forward to this with my kids tonight. And maybe you don't feel, maybe you're like, oh, I wish I didn't have to go home tonight. And that's a real thing too. Put on some music and sing and just enjoy yourself for a few minutes to kind of prep yourself to walk in.
It's interesting that you say that, because we just went away for Thanksgiving break, and my sisters and their kids were all there, and my parents have a cabin up in Mammoth, and it's like sardines in a can when we all are up there. There's like so many kids sleeping on sleeping bags, like on camping mats and the whole thing. And it gets a little hectic, and there's so many boys, 7 grandkids, and 2 of them are girls, and they're just like coloring through the chaos. And the boys are like trying to flip on the couch. It's like a whole thing. And it tends to get a little bit, intense, where people are like, don't do that. Sit down. You're going to break your face. Like everyone's like worried about physical harm, and like, just, you're like, how do I keep their face safe or their body safe? And I thought to myself, like, before, because I was, gearing up for Black Friday, and I'm like launching all these products that I was supposed to have launched over 6 months, really ended up being compressed down and literally into like the last couple of months of the year. And they're finally here, and I'm so excited, but it's a little bit crunched. And so they're needing more of me at work. And I said to myself, like, I'm going to have everything done for this sale and for this launch of magnesium before I go on this trip, and I'm not going to tell my kids what to do. Like, if I'm not liking their behavior, I'm going to do something fun and try to be, and I do have the luxury of being able to think about being, not to say the fun parent. And I feel like sometimes you hear people say this, like someone's always around and correcting and like, I don't want to say helicoptering, but like Chris is in that role because he's with our kids most of the time. And it allows for me to be like more of the fun parent and swoop in and be like, dance party, sous chef, play. But I did have that moment where I was like, how do I do this? And we had played charades the last time the kids were together, and they don't know how to read paper, So it's like I whisper in their ear what they're going to act out. The boys were all over the couch. I'm like, all right, who wants to play charades? And I like sat down and started playing. And after that was over, and it was maybe 10 or 15 minutes. They don't have they're like goldfish attention span. But I felt so much better about how I just turned that moment versus like everyone yelling at the boys for jumping across the like elk leather couch that my parents were like cringing. They don't want to tell our kids not to be crazy, but like we need to step in and not be like, have fun, gentle parenting, break Grandma and Grandpa's nice restoration hardware couch. No problem. Like, my parents are like, boys need stern directions. And I'm like, yeah, well, we were sitting playing Barbies our whole, like when we were little, like you didn't have to tell us anything, not until high school, at least. But it felt so much better to just sort of intervene in a way that wasn't like, I don't like this behavior, you're not doing this, but just to like redirect. And I thought to myself, like, God, I got to remember that. Like, I just need to remember how this feels. And it was fun for me. Like, I ended up just like joking with them and like giving them ideas. But like, how do we remember to use play? And I mean, you use the strategy, bring emotions to life. You talked about narrate to integrate and thinking out loud. Like, how do we start to sit down and do these things so that we're not constantly telling our kids, just yelling at them?
Well, just like any other skill, the more we practice it, the more it becomes automatic and natural for us, right? So we want to create automaticity around these kind of more playful approaches. And the way we do that is by practicing. I will say that I have parents tell me you're right, it works. It's so effective and it feels so much better to you and your kids. And it really does make our kids like us, like being with us more, and it makes us enjoy them more. So it's great. I think, what parents tell me is they're like, I don't want to do an effing puppet show to get my kids to put their shoes on. I'm tired, but here's the reality. Playfulness and using play-based strategies saves us so much cognitive, emotional, and physical energy. It is so much more effective, because the battle, when we don't do it that way, is what exhausts us even more. So I think just, if you need to, and sometimes I do this, I'll just write play on my hand to remind me to introduce that. Like, one of the most effective strategies to get your kids to get their shoes on and get in the car, or to get ready and get in the car, is by a story, to say, and make it up. It can be so stupid. You can be like, there were these 3 squirrels and they got in so much trouble, you won't even believe it. And you don't even know what's going to happen in the story. You're just throwing something out in the moment. And you're like, get your shoes on, get your backpack, get in the car. And then I'm going to tell you what these bad squirrels did and what happened. They cannot wait to get in the car. They want to know what happened to the squirrels. And you don't know either, but you're going to figure it out as soon as you get in the car. I mean, the battle that saves you is incredible. And then you know what happens? Your kids then have just practiced getting ready really efficiently without the conflict. And then they get to start practicing that. So that becomes more automatic. So much of the time, Kelly, we end up doing the same things over and over and over, even though they don't work and they exhaust us and we are so frustrated. So I think part of it is just pausing and being like, okay, what's one thing right now in the daily life of being a parent that I really dread, that I hate, that is frustrating, that worries me the most? And what could I do differently? Okay. And think about, how can I infuse play into that? It might be bedtime routine. And one of the things I would say too is, usually the battles are longer if you're starting bedtime too late. I'm a big fan of, the only thing I was really militant about as a parent is sleep. Starting the bedtime routine a little earlier, making something fun that they look forward to that's playful. So do the thing your kid fights the battles on the most first. So if toothbrushing or pajama putting on or whatever is the most, whatever, do it first, because they're less tired at the beginning. So get that out of the way. Use playfulness when you're brushing your teeth. You're looking for something in there. You're a treasure hunter. Let them, whatever, makeup, be Mary Poppins, use accents, whatever it is. But one of the best things, I had one of my 3 boys was one of those kids where no matter what boundary I set, he would always push. Always, always, always. Until I learned something. And that was, because I was flexible at times. I'd be like, sure, we can read one more story. It's fine. But then there was always one more. So eventually I started saying, this is, whatever the boundary is, this is the last book and I will not be changing my mind. And then I would not change my mind. So he knew as soon as I would say, I'm not changing my mind, that there was no reason to keep pushing. But the way I got that kid to get ready for bed really quickly and avoid the thing was, the battle was to say, as soon as you're ready, we're going to play. We played Uno for a good long while. Doesn't take very long. So have some sort of game or something fun that they look forward to. That's the thing that happens right before the reading and going to sleep. So they've got something that they're anticipating and looking forward to. They're so much more cooperative. So I would say practice, practice, practice. And then the other thing I would say is, I think we can talk about gentle parenting and playtime parameters and how we set limits and stuff too. But one of my other favorite strategies is called make yourself a mirror. And it's so simple. And it's really something we can do that leads to this playfulness. It's very simple. And all it is body, voice, and face. And what we're really doing there is right brain to right brain attunement and all the attachment stuff. But basically, whatever your kid is doing, you are responding with similar. So the example I have in the book is, one of my boys loved baseball. He was a huge Dodger fan by age of 3. He knew who got traded where. Like, he's still the hugest Dodger fan ever. But he had a little bowling, like a juggling pin that was his bat when he was 2 and 3. And he had seen a pitcher or a batter do this. He tapped the ball, the bat 3 times on the ground, would put it up on his shoulder and then pretend like he spit. And so when he would do that, then I'm throwing the ball to him. So I'm not holding a bat, but I still enact the motions with my body, face, and voice. I tap 3 times, I put the bat up and spit, and then I throw the ball. So really just joining with our kids by copying body, voice, and face. What that does is, it's like, I see you, I know you, I get you, I'm with you, I have time for you, you're important to me. And so that's just another really simple one we can add in. And then usually, like, they're kind of silly and playful. So then you join in too. As they're jumping silly, you jump silly with them, those kinds of things.
I think you made an important point earlier in the show when you said that emotional connection is joint attention. I mean, it breaks my heart because I think about, like, marriages falling apart and everybody on their cell phones and nobody even like putting it down to like connect with one another and be like really be present. Like I don't even care if it's in the room, it's on your hand, your computer's set to the side, like it's just not happening. And you feel way more guilty about it when it's with your kids versus with your spouse. And I think that's so sad. I mean, it's equally sad because it's like top down, your family's safety, the connection, like it all starts in that relationship. And I'm like equally as guilty and I'm constantly looking for ways to like hack my way out of it. Shout out to the Arrow box. If you know what this box is, it's a box. I have it in our mudroom. It has 6 chargers in it. You plug your phone in, you shut the box. You can like gamify it. You can say like, it tracks the time you're away from your phone, and then you can tag like playing in the cul-de-sac with the kids, making dinner with the kids, doing the bedtime routine, hanging out with Chris. Like it just like reminds you a kind of like dopamine hit of like I wasn't with my phone, I wasn't with my computer, I was like fully connecting, and it just helps. It's like a nice reminder to like put it away. It's so great in the car, but that make yourself a mirror is, it may not be like verbal, but it's that physical show that you're like emotional, your attention is with the child and that emotional connection is being made. And I think for a lot of us, like we're working or we're pulled in so many different directions. Like the memes and the reels are endless of like, and then the like school group WhatsApp or Signal, and you're like, there's like 100 missed messages every day about like, do we need to dress our kid like a candy cane today? Or is today the day we're supposed to bring the soup, the cans for the soup drive? Or I'm bringing PJs for the Marines today. Like kids, I'm like all for it. Like, but it feels like I wish that someone would just send me the list at the beginning of the year. Like, this is every day. And I would look at that list and I would buy everything for the whole year and I'd stack it in the garage and I'd put it in order of the day. But it's like, we're not organized. So then we're not organized and we're last minute and we're missing the days. And it's like, that's just one child's class. And it's like you add, okay, we have 3 kids and then we have a business and then we have a house and then we have parents and sisters and families. And you're like, I feel so fried sometimes that I'm like, how do I be creative? How do I play? I don't know how to be fun. I'm not fun. I'm not creative. I'm so boring.
I think what you're talking about here is absolutely crucial. This might be the most important thing for this whole episode. And that is, we know that anxiety disorders are pandemic among grownups and kids. One of the hugest contributors, besides chronic sleep deprivation, I think plays a huge role, is that we are so overstimulated. And listen, I am so guilty of this. And I'm actually actively right now, because of some challenging health issues through like perimenopausal stuff that's happening, that I literally had 2 doctors tell me in the last month, you cannot just get an extra hour of sleep on the weekend and think you're going to fix this. You have to change your life. And here's what's happening. We think of being on our devices as downtime. We think of it as like, oh my God, I'm so fried. I'm going to go zone out by scrolling. And I love social. I love your stuff. I follow all your stuff on all your recipes and I pin them. And and by the way, just as a plug, I drink your chocolate protein powder every morning in my coffee. I'm a huge fan. But I think what we think of, I just can't wait to get on my devices. And I love watching shows at night and I watch everything. I don't care if it's good or not. I love all of that. But being on our devices, this is true for children as much as it is for adults, is actually overstimulating. So when we're resting and when we're taking a break, we're actually revving our nervous systems up even more. So here's what we know. Well, let me tell a quick story. I had a woman come up to me after a talk. I was giving a talk on the book, The Power of Showing Up, the 4 S's that you and I have talked about before in a previous episode: safe, seen, soothed, and secure, and knowing that someone's going to show up for you. And she was a chaplain. And she came up to me after my talk and she said, I'm a chaplain. I go into hospital rooms when people are dying. And she said, what I got from your talk, I want to share something with you. And she said, the most important thing I do in my whole job, when I walk into a hospital room and someone's dying, is that I sit down. That's the most important thing I do. And I said, tell me more about that. And she said, without saying a word, when I sit down, that communicates to the person, I have time for you. You matter. You're important to me. And when she, and my husband and I know, let's just pause for a second on that, right? My husband and I had been having conflict leading up to that because he would get, and this is, of course, this is annoying. He would start to tell me something or ask me something, and I was checking my email. Like, so maybe he was interrupting me in the middle of something, or maybe he wasn't, but I would start to listen to him, and then I would go back to, so then he just felt completely ignored, right? That's really rude. But I was so used to doing it. I didn't even, he'd be like, and he'd get mad. And then I'd be like, wait, what just happened? I didn't even know what happened because my attention was so pulled. And because we're drinking from a fire hose, I'm just trying to knock it out so I can go to bed before midnight. So after that woman told me that, I actually it's a discipline that I do, that when a family member walks into the room, my teenagers, my husband, unless I'm like, if I can't do it right then, I'll say, hey, give me just 1 second. I'll be right with you. So I acknowledge them. And then as soon as I can, I literally close my computer. I will turn my phone upside down, and I will sit down and turn my body toward them and make eye contact. It is literally a discipline we can do. And that's that piece of being present. And then, this idea of making yourself a mirror, there's a lot of studies that show this kind of thing, is that you can tell by watching nonverbal communication if a couple is vibing on each other or not, like even if it's a first date or they've been together a long time. Because what happens is when you're really, and this is, we could really get deep into the science of this, is what we're talking about is right brain to right brain synchrony and resonance, which is what happens ideally when there's intimacy, when there's emotional connection, when there's like really good work happening between therapist and client. You actually can see their heart rate in sync. You can see the right brain to right brain synchrony happening. But what happens in those moments is they kind of mirror each other's nonverbal communication. Like one person puts their hands up on their, on their chin and leans forward. The other person leans forward and does a similar motion. So when we do this sort of nonverbal joining, it really is another way to be fully present that helps the other person feel like you are.
It's a discipline that I'm going to start using immediately. I mean, it's one thing to like put your phone away in a box and be like, yeah, my phone's in the box. But the reality is like the phone isn't in the box 24/7. The phone is in the box for specific periods within the day. And they need me when they need me. And they're going to come in when I'm on my phone or on my computer.
And I'm so bad at this. I have to practice I really have to like be disciplined about it every single day. And I think too, sometimes when you pick your kids up, that's the minute your doctor calls, even though you've been free all day and you have to take the call, right? So be respectful. Say to your kids, hey, I have to take this call. I'm going to talk to this doctor, but I'll be with you in just a minute. So you're just being respectful. When you are using your device, be like, hey, I'm going to look, I need to text dad to ask him what time, we're going to the such and such tomorrow. So you're narrating, you're kind of helping them understand why you're on your phone as well. And listen, I think, just like we talked about how you don't have to play for long periods of time, you don't have to be, in fact, if you were fully present, attuned to your child, bringing emotions to life and making yourself a mirror and doing all these things all day long, it would actually be intrusive. So I think, what the attachment science shows is that even the parents who are the most attuned, whose children have the most secure attachment to them, are really only truly attuned about 30% of the time. So that's really good to remind ourselves. It's really about being good enough, present enough of the time. And just like, you would consult with someone around their nutrition for their kids, like, don't worry about what they eat at a particular meal or even in a particular day. Think about the week, right? Kind of thinking about that. Like, have I been present a few times this week? Have I played a few times this week? Have we had delight together? And I would just encourage parents to, like, if you just we're in survival mode all the time. If you just literally set a timer for 1 minute and write down or type or make yourself a voice memo of like, what are some super fun things that you could just pull out of a hat so that in the moment you don't have to think about it. Like with our boys, we live in Pasadena, California. For whatever reason, we have a lot of skunks in certain parts of Pasadena. We're like near some naturey areas. And so one of the best things we did after dinner with our kids is we would go on a skunk hunt and we would take flashlights and we would go wander around outside. They're getting outside. They're moving their bodies after dinner, which I learned from you is really important for glucose regulation, is to move your body after we eat. So all of these things that we do And my kids remember skunk hunts, and they remember going and looking for succulents, and they remember those kinds of things. But they will not explicitly remember a lot of the time we've put in the kind of play, right? You were saying that, like, you don't play with me. They don't remember that. They don't remember it explicitly, but they remember it implicitly. It is encoded in their bodies, it's encoded in their brains, and it's encoded with how they feel about you and spending time with you. And it's never going to be perfect. We're going to mess up all the time, as you know from our last episode, and how I know you parent. It's all about repair if there are ruptures. But we really can even set limits around these things. But it's really kind of look at it more as a holistic thing as opposed to just every moment.
There are so many tools in this book and just reminders that it can be a little bit easier than we're putting the pressure on ourselves for it to be. Before we end this podcast episode, I want you to give a couple examples of how to narrate to integrate and how to think out loud.
Okay, think out loud. Here's what I love about this. You are literally, it's like the idea of sportscasting, but it's beyond sportscasting, because what you're doing is you're talking about their mind and their motivations as much as what they're doing. So if your child, so you said one of your boys is really into cars and trucks right now. So they're like, building a ramp, or they're making the car kind of like go up the ramp. And literally all you're doing is you're narrating what's happening. So you're like, oh, are you building a ramp? Or you're building a ramp, your car's going up higher. So what you're doing there is you're matching. So what they get from this is, my mom sees me. She understands my mind. She understands like what I'm into, what I'm doing in this moment. But you're also giving them a rich basis of vocabulary and language to kind of go with the motor activity. So you're actually integrating their brain up by just thinking out loud what you think what they're doing, what they might be feeling, and what their intentions are. So that's kind of, you're just being that kind of like sportscaster, but it's not just what they're doing, but also their minds. Narrate to integrate is similar to name it to tame it in the whole brain child. And really, I would say all of, this play is a way to do what we talk about in all my other books. It's a way to integrate the brain. It's the way to help reduce discipline challenges and to build attachment and all of these things. Narrate to integrate is basically going back and forth between left brain and right brain. So left brain would be like the think out loud, where we're giving words to what's happening. So they're getting that. Then we're talking about feelings or what their intentions or their motivations are. And that's more right brain, or we're tuning into what's happening with their body. And then we're maybe narrating again. So what we're doing is we're kind of going back and forth, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain with what we're doing. So maybe you're playing, my kids again, maybe because they love the Dodgers, they love to be like the hot dog guy. They love to like make hot dogs, which gross, but make hot dogs, and they would sell the hot dogs or whatever. So if I pretend to take a bite, and I'm like, that's right brain. So I'm adding nonverbal communication, but I'm communicating emotion. And then I'm like, how did you make this hot dog? And then they start talking. So what I'm doing is I'm creating firing in left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. And then all of that then becomes more integrated. And if you know the whole brain child, an integrated brain is a brain that is more flexible, adaptive, resilient, energized, and stable. It's a foundation for mental health and for social and emotional intelligence. So really, just by simply playing and saying things that they're doing and talking about emotions and all of these things that we've been talking about, really truly are integrating your child's brain as it is developing in this super plastic time of childhood.
Well, I feel like I've learned so much. You've taken me back to the basics and reminded me of why I loved my childhood so much. And I think that has to do with my mom being on the floor as often as she was. And I know it probably wasn't all the time, but to me, it does, when I look back, it does feel substantial. It feels like she was always there. She was there in the car when she picked me up, and she was there on the floor when we played Barbies. And I do remember my dad got to be the fun parent for sure. He wasn't the disciplinarian unless it was very serious, and he would roll right in and tease and joke and poke, and it was light, and it felt really good. And I think it did. I don't know. Like, I think it was a special sauce. I'm really grateful for them. I know that was like an absolute privilege that my mom got to stay at home with me, and that she wanted to be there and play with me, and my sisters. And I know it wasn't all the time. Like, I know it wasn't, but to have those memories, I want my boys to have those. And this book is just it's a reminder for us to be playful and to be present and to have the tools to do that, whether we're closing our computer or mirroring their behavior. Tina, this is probably the most useful for me in that it's action based, and it's the stuff that makes me feel like I'm good at it at parenting. I think a lot of the parenting stuff out there really like can make us feel like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Like, are they being seen? Am I holding my boundaries? Am I like correcting? Like, am I connecting before I'm correcting? Like, there's so many things I'm trying to keep track of in my brain. And it's like, can it just be fun? Like they're like, I thought to myself the other day, like when Bash said that to me, like, you never play with me. Like, God, I like cried that night. I'm not going to lie. Like I thought to myself, like, he's not going to want to play with me in 2 or 3 years. Like, I don't want to like look back and be like, I didn't play with you when you wanted to play with me.
Yes. Kelly, I want you to go back to him at a nice time when you guys are snuggling at bedtime or whatever. And I want you to say, you told me, and tell him, go back to it and say, do you feel that way today too? Because sometimes it really is about that moment. And I know sometimes too, like I remember my middle one, he was a very cool anger kind of kid, and he knew how to push my buttons. And he would say the most hurtful things to me. And then I would have to remember, like, I'm not going to internalize that quite yet. I'm going to hold that. That was important information. I don't know that it's totally accurate. I want to be open to it being accurate. But then usually when I would go back to him later and I would say, you said this earlier, I want to check in with you. Is this how you're feeling? Or were you mad in the moment? Or were you just really wanting to play at that moment? Almost always he would say, no, I didn't mean that. So I want you to go back to him and just say, are you feeling, this? And you probably will feel better after that conversation. But I also, and keep in mind at his age too, he's not globally talking about his childhood. I really believe he was talking about that day. I do. And you're such a present mom. You're such a good mom. And I think that the parents who worry and who feel like you feel, it's because you care so much and you're doing such a good job. So if you find yourself, and again, I wanted to say all the things you're doing that you feel like keep you from being able to play and be present, those are important pieces of your relationship with your child too. And I would say, unless your child is in danger of hurting themselves, hurting someone else, destroying property, any particular behavior or moment is always a back burner moment. And the relationship with your child over time, not about today, not about this week or even this month, but your relationship with your child is front burner. And the more we can access play and playfulness and joining, the better. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be intermittent. And I would say, you mentioned this earlier, and I'll just come back to it for a second. We might not feel playful because life is so overwhelming to us. If we feel like I don't feel playful at all, that is even more reason we need to do it. We need it more. The less we feel like doing it, the more we need it. And if we can just let go, set a timer for 15 minutes and join with them, be fully present, be silly. Like I said, use accents. Just tune into what they are doing and what they're feeling. That is everything.
You always make me feel so much better. I thank you for always being there for a text or a call, or even like, I feel like my poor audience, half of these parenting podcasts turn into like the help me parent my kids better.
But everything you're talking about is so universal. I've felt all of those things. I have experienced all of those things. And I think your audience does too. It's just, this is the trenches of parenting. It's the hardest thing we will ever do. And it's the most rewarding thing we will ever do. And I think at the end of the day, your kids absolutely know you are there for them, that they are loved unconditionally. And it's funny. I remember one time telling my mom, who was a really amazing mom, I was like, Mom, I don't remember you ever yelling. I remember you just being so patient. And she just died laughing. And she was like, I yelled, like, I'm so glad you remember it that way. And my kids don't necessarily, like, they remember bedtimes where I yelled a lot, especially when they were little. Like, I was so overwhelmed. They remember that too, but they also know without a doubt that I love them more than anything. And they are the world. And I know your kids feel that too.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for writing yet another amazing book that I know will be a bestseller. Thank you for giving us the simplicity to parent and be playful and find delight in our children, and for us to help them feel seen and have that emotional connection with our attention being with them. This was wonderful, as it always is. I'm so excited for your book. I'm so excited to take my megaphone and shout that people buy it, pre-order it, and do all the things. Where can people follow along? Where can they get your new book, The Way of Play?
Yes. So obviously where all books are sold, everywhere. My favorite social media platform is Instagram, and you can find me there at Tina Payne Bryson, although I'm across many of them. But Tina Payne Bryson is where I am on Instagram. I post tons of stuff there. And then my website's tinabryson.com.
Thanks, Tina.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.